You are Mr. Hardcastle?
The face of the man addressing him was slender, with pointed features, the cheekbones cutting a sharp profile with the light from behind him. Max could not immediately distinguish any traits that would hint if this man was one of his kind, or simply a ghoul, yet he at least knew who he was addressing, so any fear of being discovered by a nosy customs official vanished quickly.
Yes, I am him,
Max replied stiffly, cracking his neck out of habit as he gripped the edges of the wooden box to haul himself out through it.
The absolute indignity of having to FedEx myself halfway across the planet.
Max thought to himself.
Have these people never heard of a Gulf Stream?
Just a second, Mr. Hardcastle.
The man's voice was calm but commanding.
If you would be so kind as to allow us to search your traveling compartment as well as your person. One cannot be too careful, you understand.
There was something in the tone of the man that screamed kindred, yet Max noticed he was breathing. It was slow, controlled, but there was no denying that slow rise and fall of the chest, the widening of nostrils. If this man was kindred, he had an even better show of mortality than Max had. Max considered for a moment what would happen if he denied him, then thought better of it. No need to ruffle any feathers this early and for no reason. And besides, he was sure that his sire, the dignified and thrice-honored Prince of New York, damn her name, would hear about any and all little acts of rebellion he may afford himself. No, better to comply.
Of course!
Max's hands left the edges, palms splayed open in a gesture of cooperation, as he gave his characteristic killer smile.
I travel light, as you can see, but I did bring a bottle of fine chateau for the host. Unless, of course, it was confiscated along the way.
The joke didn't land, the narrow-faced man keeping the professional and unemotional smile of someone who has paid a handsome amount of money to entertain guests. The three armed guards, carrying assault rifles reminding Max of a Belgian model he had seen quite a few years ago, didn't laugh either, although one shuffled slightly.
They are deaf-mute, the man explained as Max glanced their way, and the mirrored glasses provide some modicum of protection against most uses of disciplines.
There was a bit of a smug satisfaction in his voice.
Not that I am suggesting you had any intention of doing anything, Mr. Hardcastle, merely...
The man gave a slight nod, and the guards walked up to Max, one digging through the fabrics he had been laying on, while the other motioned for him to get up with one hand before he began to pat him down.
Explaining our precautions. I am Göran Persson, seneschal of the Council of Stockholm. I will be your liaison during your first few nights here.
You did what to your own guys?
Max thought to himself. Max was far more disturbed by the fact that the man would cripple his soldiers' ability to speak, rather than the implication that Max would use dominate on them. Max was a Ventru, after all. Persson allowed himself a slight smile, and Max immediately decided he trusted this man even less than he could throw him.
You will see that, despite some of the bells and whistles being a bit different, our way of running things are quite similar to what you in the New World are used to.
Max was taking all of this in with the trained demeanor of not only a Ventru, but that of a prince. There was no need for him to get worked up, and if this Göran decided to get a rise out of him, it wasn't going to happen. Instead, he merely returned the polite smile as the soldier stepped back, giving Persson a nod. The soldier behind him had stepped away as well, carrying a few things to the seneschal.
Your personal effects will be returned to you shortly.
Persson's smile remained as he motioned for them to walk. The warehouse they were in was poorly lit, and Max realized, looking around, that there were security cameras pointed squarely at them.
My men have taken the liberty to retrieve your luggage, and we have provided your retainer with dining and lodgings while he waits for you. He will meet us in the garage.
Drescher. He was actually caught by surprise that they knew about his ghoul, but he supposed he shouldn't have been. Stockholm, from what he had gathered, had been at war with the Sabbat for the last 100 or so years. At least that's what Helen had told him. In a city besieged by the Sword of Cain for that long, you had to be careful, thorough. But that was useful to know, as external enemies had a wonderful way of uniting people. Helen had informed Max that the political climate of Stockholm was tense.
You've got a nice operation running here, Seneschal Pearson. Reminds me of home.
Max mused as they left through a set of double doors, coming out into the airport terminal. It was practically devoid of life, and Max remembered that the flight that had been arranged for him had landed in a section of Arlanda reserved for private planes, usually those belonging to individuals who couldn't be bothered with the trite process of checking in and going through the tax-free before takeoff. "Thank you," Göran replied, returning to his previous emotionless professionalism. "I must ask, and I do apologize for the forwardness, but do you require stilling your hunger before we proceed to the council? They have informed me that the current issue on the agenda is taking somewhat longer than previously thought. Otherwise, I am also able to give you a brief tour of the city, if you wish." Every damn time, always trying to deduce the feeding preferences.
I am not hungry.
Max replied dryly.
At least not to the point where it'll affect my judgment. A tour sounds fine. Might as well see where I'll be spending my foreseeable future.
The seneschal nodded as they stepped through two sets of automated doors, the cool air of the night hitting Max as they entered the garage. "Of course. It will be about an hour of a drive from here to central Stockholm. I have prepared a dossier, but perhaps you would rather have me recite it for you." Max gave a theatrical shrug, finding the man's phrasing annoying. Obviously he was a ghoul, or, if not, the man lacked much of a spine.
Knock yourself out, seneschal.
Enough to see if they understood American idioms. "Then I shall read some choice bits from it, sir." Person nodded to the guards who walked up to a black limousine, giving no hint that he understood Max's idiom. The venturous ghoul and longtime friend was standing by the car, putting out a cigarette as they approached. For a second he looked like he was going to say something, but he caught Max's eyes and fell quiet, giving the slightest nod. He understood. Silently Max indicated for Drescher to get into the car. The way to Stockholm was long and uninteresting. Forests were replaced by fields, then more forests. Endless flatlands with dense areas of greenery. Somehow Max had expected something else. Fjords, perhaps. Did they have those here? He wasn't sure. Stockholm was a big city on an archipelago with the smell of sea spray in the air. Reminded him of home back in Queens, albeit on a much smaller scale. "The council holds the de facto power of Stockholm," Person continued without giving his dossier a glance. Clearly, he had it all memorized. "And a member of the council is voted prince-elect by their representatives. At the moment, the current prince-elect is Christina of..." The seneschal gave Drescher a sudden look.
Sergeant Drescher knows how we operate. He has served me for quite some years.
Max spoke in a relaxed tone.
Decades, really, preening jackass.
Max thought quietly to himself.
"Ah, yes. Well then, Prince-elect Christina is of Clan Ventru."
Of course she is,
thought Max to himself.
"Currently her bloc holds a majority in the council, with Gustav Sørensen, Clan Bruja being the vice prince, so to speak."
Person cleared his throat.
Formality, perhaps, but the council has operated in this matter for a long time, and it has proven itself sufficient. I dare say, capable in handling matters of political nature.
Ah, the loyal opposition.
Max thought to himself.
How fitting for it to be a Bruja.
Max made a mental note to remember that little snippet of useful information.
I was told there had been conflicts with the Sabbat recently.
Max inquired, somewhat looking out the window at the strange architecture of Stockholm and paying attention to the man's words.
Mere skirmishes.
The man's dismissive tone was almost insulting.
The so-called Sword of Cain has never been anything more than an annoyance, and tonight even less than that. I was told,
Person locked eyes suddenly with Max and the smile had come back,
that you had made quite a name for yourself fighting them in New York, From what I recall, one of the few cities that switched hands. To the Camarilla. This East Coast conflict did not escape our notice, I assure you.
And there it is. The unofficial 8th tradition.
Max thought to himself.
Everything is under control. It must really be bad then. No, we didn't cash in Boon-debt and yanked me out of a praxis just to cater to an elder halfway across the world. No, everything is fine. Yeah, sure it is.
Max felt just a flash of temper that he quickly subdued. This man was trying to provoke some kind of response. The suspicion he'd had was now a certainty. And he was a ghoul too, not even a kindred. Had he been a lesser man, the adventurer would have balked at this dishonor. Yet a ghoul had been made a seneschal for this council, so clearly things were different on this side of the Atlantic.
I see my reputation precedes me, even half a world away.
We have arrived now, Person continued smoothly, to the city proper. Our chauffeur will drive us around so I may show you some places of importance.
Max nodded in approval.
Good.
Stockholm turned out to be a study in contrast, to say the least. Brutalist institutes stood wall to wall with Jugend-style palaces, opposite modern glass-walled skyscrapers containing open-air offices. A large white sphere of a building was apparently an arena and likewise housed the block Elysium of the Bruja and their allies. And the city hall stood like a watchtower by the waterfront, at the top 3 crowns catching the reflection of a spotlight.
We celebrated our 750th anniversary a few years back, Göran said with what Max thought was a touch of pride in his voice, although the earliest settlements predate this period quite extensively. This city grew organically. It was never planned like so many of your American ones.
Göran gave him a pointed look.
No offense.
None taken.
Max gruffed, then smiled, his eyebrows only slightly lowering in a hint of a scowl.
But do continue.
Right, well, I merely wish to point out that finding your way around here will be quite different, as will the division of territory. Domain would be the right word. If there is ever any doubt, I strongly recommend you consult me in the matter. I am, as you know, at your disposal.
I'll keep it in mind,
Max muttered as he looked at the buildings they were driving by. Not that many over 6 or 8 stories tall, many lights out, very few cars on the roads. It felt like the city was sleeping.
Barely 2 in the morning. I'm sure I'll need it.
I have just been informed they will receive you at Elysium, Mr. Hardcastle. Presumably your presentation will take place there. We shall visit your lodgings first, so that you will have a chance to freshen up.
Max said absently. Max had not expected to visit the royal castle on his very first night in Sweden, but he was glad that he had been given the opportunity to get dressed. The tuxedo was, as always, a perfect fit, and he looked around at the gathered kindred and tried to measure their status by the way they dressed, moved, and spoke. Their cliques, their subtle body hints, anything to give him an edge.
At least they got my size right.
Max muttered out loud, noting the quality of the material.
Off the rack, this stuff ain't.
Thankfully, most everyone was giving him a wide berth for now. They were, all of them, Nosferatu included, dressed impeccably. Perhaps not surprising, seeing where the Elysium was being held. No one spoke with him, however. No one dared. No one wanted to be the first. Max ate it up, where everyone was noticing him but not speaking. It's fine. They will remember the image he cut. Then, as if on cue, Persson and another man Max didn't recognize stepped in through the double doors into the ballroom.
Prince-elect Christina and the Primogen Council.
Showtime,
Max said under his breath, steeling his nerves. Immediately, everyone stood up, or even at attention, and Max quickly followed suit. Having to pay your respect to the biggest peacock in the room was something he was used to. Yet, as the 8 kindred walked through the door, and Max couldn't help but notice, in pairs with hooked arms, he realized immediately the difference in age between him and the council he was facing. The way they moved, dresses sliding with barely a sound, legs in perfect angles with heels clicking against the floor. It was like a military procession. They entered and fanned out as if on some well-trained cue, and as they had all arrived at their designated positions, the music that had been playing resumed, as if time had but frozen for a moment. Max saw the woman who must have been Christina, the prince-elect, and he saw little of his sire's pretenses for strength in her. She was like a Hellenistic statue, chiseled into perfection, perfectly curled hair flowing down the sides of her face, framing the youthful features belaying the age behind them. "Ah, you must be Maximilian S. Hardcastle." She spoke clearly, her voice carrying only a slight accent. "I have heard many things about you. Welcome to our city, and welcome to our Elysium." Max smiled when he heard his name called by the prince. This is what he was here for. Max offered a deep, respectful bow in front of her.
I am indeed Maximilian Sebastian Hardcastle, child of Her Majesty Hellene Panhard, Prince of New York City, child of Michaelia, in memoriam, Childe of Hardcastle, at your service. Thank you for receiving me, your majesty.
Max said in a formal, rehearsed form.
After all,
Max thought very quietly to himself.
you jerked me out of my own praxis to be here.